2, 1.
Clayton,
Hey,
thanks for coming on, man.
absolutely, my pleasure.
Really appreciate it. We got connected through a mutual buddy,
Yeah,
and he told me what you were doing. I checked out all the stuff you have going on. Very exciting. You're an attorney here in Kansas City, and you have your own business called the KC Estate Planner.
that's correct.
Really like the branding there.
Thanks.
Just wanted to have you on, talk a little bit more about your business.
Sure.
Being a business owner, being an attorney, and I'm very fascinated by estate planning actually because I have 3 other siblings, and my parents are getting a little bit older.
Yeah.
And it's something that we have to think about, unfortunately. Sure. And so this is very informative for me, and I'm looking forward to this. So, KC Estate Planner, I was just checking out some of your background. You started off as an attorney. You went to UMKC and started off as an attorney. Were you with a big firm, or did you come out work for yourself then?
No, right after law school, I went to work for a very small general practice firm based out of downtown.
Okay.
There were just 2 partners and myself, so 3 attorneys in the office. And we kind of handled, like I said, a little bit of everything, kind of general practice. So we did some business disputes, partnership disputes, a little bit of personal injury type work, some criminal defense work, speeding tickets, DUIs, those kinds of things. So, I think I got a pretty good background just in working in a small law firm, practicing law, and learning how to manage a small law firm. So that's kind of where I started. The opportunity was certainly there to go work for a big firm.
Right.
But, one of the things that everybody talks about when going to a big firm is billable hours, right? Everything's about billable hours, and you gotta meet a certain requirement in order to be eligible for bonuses at the end of the year and things like that. And when you put it all on paper, it ends up being about 70 to 80 hours a week of real work, and sometimes more like 100 hours a week. And that's just not really my lifestyle.
Yeah.
So.
What does it look like coming out right out of law school and working for a big firm? Are you just kind of doing what everyone else is telling you to do?
Absolutely. You're a workhorse.
Yeah.
It's definitely a workhorse type position, and they kind of stick you in a back room, and you draft a lot of pleadings and do a lot of discovery type work.
That sounds like my hell.
It sounds like my hell too.
Yeah.
And that is the one reason that I really kind of held out for a small firm position.
So did you get recruited from that small firm out of school? Did you have some connections?
I got my job through connections.
Okay.
It took a little while to develop, but eventually it worked out. Just for a little bit of background, I graduated from UMKC Law School in 2010, right at the back end of the recession. And a lot of folks that I graduated with really struggled to find work out of law school. And I actually had a couple friends that were delivering pizzas with a law degree in the back of their car.
I heard this.
Because it was a really hard time. Yes. And so if you weren't in that like top 10, top 20 of your class, finding a job was a real challenge. And so the rest of us that weren't that fortunate, we really had to work and try to find something. And so after several months of searching, a good friend of mine came to me and mentioned that his uncle was looking for someone to come in and kind of alleviate some work from his business partner who was going through some health problems. It started off as a temporary job. I was making $20 an hour as an attorney, and I was working maybe 20 hours a week. Jeez. I thought it was going to be a temporary thing. Yeah. 6 months go by, and they ended up offering me a full-time position. And
that's great.
And I stayed there for about 3.5 years.
So you seized an opportunity.
It was the only opportunity available, and I jumped on it.
That's awesome. So and then, where'd you go from working with those 2 guys?
So I worked with them for about 3.5 years. And towards the end of my time there, I realized that I didn't really want to be in that kind of general practice area. I wanted to do something a little more specialized. And kind of drawing on some past experiences, it dawned on me that estate planning would be a great fit for me. And so in about February, I think of 2014, February 2014, I just sat down, put pen to paper, and started kind of trying to figure out what it would look like to open my own estate planning firm. And so from February of 2014 until June of 2014, I kind of put together a business plan and tried to figure out what it would look like as a 30-year-old to go out on my own. And it looked like it was plausible.
Yeah.
It looked like something that I could do. I wasn't tied down to anything. I wasn't married. I didn't have kids. So, it really made sense to go ahead and take that leap of faith and do it.
And so then you created KC Estate Planner.
So at that time, I actually opened up originally under the name, the very long and annoying, the law offices of Clayton Harper.
Okay.
And I did that just out of traditional convention. Historically, law firms often simply refer to the names of their owners. Many, many moons ago, that was by statute. You had to. You couldn't use trade names in law firms. You couldn't use anything that would be considered misleading. And so the legal profession really just kind of didn't really like using trade names or anything that wasn't just someone's name. But in the last 10 years or so, those conventions have been loosened a little bit. So I initially went out, Clayton Harper, LLC, and I was immediately doing general practice work because that's what I was used to, and I had to make some money. I had to, I had bills to pay. So at that point, I was starting to gravitate towards more estate planning. So I was advertising that a little bit more as part of my practice. But, I was still taking anything that came through the door, landlord-tenant work, traffic tickets, anything and everything. And so I did that for about 2.5 years. And then...
That's how we started. We were just kind of working on everything. And then as you get more honed in, and you get the snowball rolling with inquiries, you can start kind of carving out your niche.
Exactly.
And it's a much better place to be when you're in your niche because you know what you can and cannot do.
Exactly. You're exactly right. So that that kind of led me then in 2015 to the rebranding that you mentioned earlier. I met with an ad agency here in town, a small ad agency by the name of Behemoth. And met with them and kind of talked to them about, how do I make sure that I am really describing exactly what I'm doing and do it in a way that that connects with people in the community.
Yeah.
And so after some talking, we came up with the KC Estate Planner. And so over the last 3 years, I've been operating under that name. I've been doing exclusively estate planning, trust drafting, wills, powers of attorney, probate work. And then on the side, because it kind of goes hand in hand with estate planning, I also do some business planning, business succession planning. What do I do if my kids don't want to run my business type stuff? So that's, that's kind of where we are today. That's kind of how I ended up where I am today.
Quick question. Did you ever have any hesitancy with putting KC in the name? That's something we've thought about because then you might not work with clients outside of our area.
So a couple of things on that question. First of all, when it comes to attorneys, we can only work in states where we're licensed. And licensing requirements for attorneys are a bear. You really have to sit for bar exams in every state you want to take, that you want to practice. And those are several $1,000s to take. They take a year to study for. They're a nightmare. And so I'm limited to practicing in the states of Kansas and Missouri. The likelihood of me trying to practice somewhere else is very low because I'm kind of tied to where I'm licensed to practice.
So it's a no-brainer to have KC in there.
Exactly.
It goes perfectly with the branding.
It absolutely does. I service the Kansas City metro area, and I also really kind of wanted to take advantage of the local sentiment that has really been born in Kansas City over the last 10 years or so. People in Kansas City are very proud of their town, and I really kind of wanted to focus on that and piggyback on that idea.
When should a person start thinking about estate planning?
That's a very, very common question that I get, and I would say that most people don't really start thinking about it until it's far too late. When kind of like I said earlier, when I was putting pen to paper and trying to come up with how I wanted my law firm to look as an estate planning law firm, I made the decision at that point that I was going to start focusing on young families. I wanted to focus on people that were 25 to 35, just married, just having their first kids. And even though I knew that there probably wasn't going to be a ton of work there, I wanted to at least get people thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I think...
Well, and you're building a book of business for 20, 30 years.
Exactly.
Your long-term thinking.
Exactly. So if I'm meeting with 25 to 35-year-olds on a regular basis that have never thought about estate planning, think it's for old rich people, then maybe in 5 years, maybe when they're 30 to 40, they're going to start coming to me, right? So really the idea was to get people to start thinking about estate planning much earlier than people traditionally think about estate planning. Like I said, most people think about it when it's too late, or they think about it when their parents start to pass away. So folks in their 50s and 60s who are like, oh my gosh, I haven't done anything, or maybe I had a will made 30 years ago. Maybe I should have this looked at, or maybe I should do something else. So really, in my opinion, I don't think it's ever too early to start thinking about it. The other thing about meeting with younger folks, 25 to 35, 25 to 40-year-olds, is that after they meet with me, I like to think, and maybe I'm just being arrogant when I say this, but I like to think that they're going to go home and talk to their folks about it and say, hey, I met with an estate planning attorney. Have you guys talked about this? Have you guys done anything about this? Instead of the other way around, right? Instead of grandparents coming in, setting up an estate plan, and you say, well, do your kids know that you're here? Do your kids know anything about this? Well, no. I don't want to tell them anything about it. And I think, not to get too far off topic of where we are, but I think that's also kind of another problem, a generational thing. The older generation doesn't like to talk about this stuff with the younger generation, whereas our generation doesn't care.
Yeah.
We know that it's important. We know that it's something that we're going to have to do at some point, and most folks know that their parents probably have something or should have something, and so they're not afraid to go talk about it.
Yeah.
So really, the whole idea of the KC Estate Planner was to get people thinking about estate planning earlier.
I like it.
Yeah.
Are you able to talk about maybe a situation specifically where someone did not? They were left with a very large estate. There's maybe multiple children. It's just a complete nightmare trying to divvy it up.
Countless stories. But one that I will share with you is one that I'm still currently working on. That's been going on for about 5 years now.
Okay.
So an old client of mine, someone that I've been working with for about 5 years or so on some business deals, came to me and said that his business partner had passed away unexpectedly. This gentleman, the business partner, owned, I think, 8 or 9 IHOP restaurants in the Kansas City area. All of them were owned under different LLCs.
Wow.
And if you don't know anything about IHOPs, they are cash cows. They generate a lot of income. And so this gentleman's estate, when he passed away, was about $5 million. Nothing to shake a stick at, right? And he had no estate plan. He had absolutely nothing. He drops over dead one day at work. So I think let's see if I remember this correctly. He had 5 children. 3 were over the age of 18, so they were adults. Oh, excuse me.
You're good.
3 of them were adults, and 2 of them were minors. So with the minor children, the court had to appoint conservators for those children because obviously they can't represent themselves, and the mother would have a different interest than them because she wants more money than they should be getting. And this has been going on for 5 years, fighting through trying to manage these companies. The court had to appoint somebody to manage the IHOPs. So the estate is paying that individual to manage the IHOPs.
Is that individual part of the family?
No, this is a public administrator that was appointed by the court as a special administrator
to manage his businesses.
To manage the businesses.
That doesn't make any
because
sense.
Because nobody in the family wanted to do so.
Oh.
And there was fear that if any of the family members were managing the business, managing the books of the business, that money would start disappearing.
Okay.
So you basically have this person acting almost as a kind of a trustee of sorts.
Wow.
Managing this business.
Okay.
So he's got to get paid, and he's getting paid out of the estate. He's been doing this for 5 years now. I can't even imagine. I think the last bill that I saw from him, he was charging roughly $75,000 every 6 months.
Wow.
So $150,000 a year.
Yeah.
Just out of the estate, gone. Nobody's going to see that.
Wow.
And all that guy had to do was sit down with the estate planning attorney for an hour and a half, and all of this would have been avoided.
And appoint things to the right people.
Exactly, and appoint the right people to manage certain assets.
I don't want to hone on this family too much, but are all the kids having separate lawyers represent them for the estate?
So a couple of the children have settled with the estate. So they've decided on a dollar amount that they thought was fair, and they just wanted to get out and be done with it. There is one child who is still trying to fight for what she believes is hers through her attorney. And then the mother is still trying to determine the value of other business interests that this gentleman was a part of. And it was one of those interests, a real estate business that the gentleman had with my former client. And they had gone to the trouble of drafting up an agreement, basically a buy-sell agreement, that said if one of us passes away, the other person can purchase that partner's estate or that partner's interest for X number of dollars. Well, the wife doesn't think that that was a valid agreement.
Yeah.
She thinks it was fraudulent, and so she's been fighting that for 5 years now.
What do you for Kansas City? A lot of folks who have some extra money, they'll either go get a farm or a lake house.
Sure.
I'm sure you see that, in the Ozarks and all the other lakes around here, and they have 2, 3, 4 kids or so.
Sure.
And what kind of recommendations do you have, just for something as simple as that? If a Kansas City family has maybe 1 or 2 other properties, not including their current house.
Sure.
What would be a standard setup for 3 kids and there's 3 homes? There's 3 homes owned by the parents.
So there's really a couple ways that you can do it. There's a couple common ways to do it, and then I'm going to talk about another situation that I've got going on right now that is a little bit interesting. So, if you have a trust, if you have a revocable living trust, and if I can talk about that for just a second for folks who might not be super familiar with it, the best way that I can describe a trust for people who aren't familiar with them is to think of it almost as kind of a separate business.
Okay.
For your family. Okay. So you set up this trust, you set up this entity over here, and then you appoint a trustee who's kind of the manager of the business.
Okay.
And that trustee might be you yourself, right? But you still have to appoint someone as the trustee of that business, right? And then in order to make the business run, you transfer property to the business. You put assets in the business so that the manager has something to manage, right? So now you've got this entity. It owns all these assets. You've got a manager who's managing those assets for the benefit of the beneficiaries of the trust. So that's kind of your overarching.
Is that manager who is that typically a family member?
So it can be anybody. Okay. Typically, the initial trustee, when you set up the trust, is the person making the trust.
Okay.
So if a husband and wife are setting up a trust for their family, the two of them are going to be the initial trustees.
Right.
And then from there, once those people pass away, it is fairly common to name a child, sometimes the oldest child, sometimes the smartest child, sometimes the only child that the parents like, whatever the case may be. But it's very common to then name a child as the successor trustee, we call it. Or in the alternative, you can use a corporate trustee. For example, there are several trust companies around Kansas City that all they do is administer and manage trusts. So like Midwest Trust Company, Country Club Trust Companies, a piece of Country Club Bank. Most banks have their own trust departments that specialize really in just administering and managing trusts. And so the benefit of having a corporate trustee in those situations is that they're not emotionally invested in what's going on in the family. So after parents pass away, you've got 3 kids that are fighting about stuff. The corporate trustee is not going to care.
How much does one of those cost per year?
They charge about the same as a financial planner.
Okay.
Right. So, and really their fee structure is almost identical to what you would see if you sat down with a financial planner. So it's usually X number of basis points on the overall value of the assets. Yeah. Most trust companies charge about 1%.
Okay.
And some clients kind of balk at that and say, "Oh, that seems like a lot of money." And I always remind them that they're not going to have to pay it because they're dead.
Yeah, that's true.
Right? So some people are a little hesitant to have a corporate trustee involved, and especially with smaller trusts where everything is just distributed immediately. That's not necessary. Usually, one of the kids can handle that. So back to your question about the house. So let's say we've got someone who's got a primary residence and then a couple vacation homes, right? Typically, what I would recommend in that situation is just make sure that everything's in the trust. Okay, so you take those houses and you draft a new deed that says, I, Clay Harper, transfer to Clay Harper as trustee of the Harper Family Trust this property, right? And so that way all the property is in the trust. And then from the trust, you can do whatever the heck you want with it, right? So you could put something in the trust that says, let's say I've got 3 kids and I've got 3 houses, house number 1 to kid number 1, house number 2 to kid number 2, house number 3 to kid number 3. So that's one way to do it, right? Another way to do it would be to give each of those kids a 1/3 interest in each of the homes. So all 3 of the kids own each of the 3 homes. And then let them do whatever they want with them. If they want to sell them, they want to stay there. If they want to rent them out, they can do whatever they want. Another option, the third option, that goes along with the situation that I've been working with recently, is to set up a separate trust for just one of those houses. Let's say you've got a ranch out in the middle of nowhere, and you got 600 acres out there. Family can go out and hunt on it, fish on it. There's a cabin out there or whatever. Well, let's say you want your grandkids and your great-grandkids to be able to enjoy that, right? So you put that house in a separate trust, and you set up that trust so that all of the beneficiaries are, even though they might not be known right now, can be identified, right? So let's say I've got 3 kids. I say to my 3 kids and their children, and then we use this language called per stirpes, which means that as soon as any of these kids die, if they have kids, then those kids then inherit that interest, right? So I currently have a situation where there are grandfather built a cabin out in the woods, and grandfather had 4 children. Those children have 16 grandchildren, and there are currently 28 great-grandchildren.
Wow.
So you've got about 70 people, give or take. I think my math might be a little off there. You've got about 70 people, give or take, that are beneficiaries of this trust that have a right to use this house for as long as possible. Now, unfortunately for them, they're getting to a point in their lives where there are so many people and so many family members that are a part of this trust that managing the trust is becoming very difficult.
Yep.
And so, now they're currently in a situation where they're trying to figure out how to get the house out of the trust, right?
Yeah.
And try to do something new with it, because there are certain family members who, might be just using it and not paying for upkeep, or, just not contributing to the property, whereas there might only be 3 or 4 family members who are sharing the bulk of the expense of owning 600 acres. Because the trust has no money left over. There was a bank account that was also in the trust that was supposed to last forever.
Right.
Of course it didn't.
Yeah, right.
So now all these people are shelling out money out of their own pocket to make this house last, right?
Right.
So they're in a position now where they're trying to figure out how to get it out of the trust and do something new. But that is a great way. We call those dynasty trusts that kind of go on forever. But that is, that's another concept, another way that you can take one of those rental or vacation properties and really make sure that it's going for the benefit of your family.
It sounds like the best thing to do is you just sell all your assets, then give all the cash to the kids. I mean, that would be that's easier said than done.
Yeah.
But how do you avoid a situation where kids keep having their kids and so on and so forth, and then you have properties that you're trying to divide up with it? I mean, it sounds very difficult to,
Yeah, and don't use that one example as an example of what happens.
What's
with
a good
example, trust, right? So normally, what you see in trust drafting is that the trust is usually, and the trust assets are usually for the benefit of the children of the grantor, the children of the person making the trust, and the grandchildren of the person making the trust. And that's usually where it stops. So most of the trusts that I draft, most of the work that I do, obviously, you know, anything that the people making the trust, we call them the grantors, anything that the grantors put in that trust, as long as they're alive, it's for their benefit, right? So if I put my own house in my own trust, obviously I can use that house. I can do whatever I want with that house. If I sell that house, I sell the house, right? But then when I pass away, then that trust property is for the benefit of my children. Okay, so back to the situation. Let's say I've got 3 kids. Let's say I've just got the one house, and I name them all 1/3 owners of that house after I pass away. Well, realistically, what's going to happen? They're going to sell the house and they're going to split the proceeds, right? And then the trust property is gone. The trust is over. So that's really kind of more typical of how the trust relationship operates.
Yeah.
But then, you know, you might have other situations where you want to provide for a certain group of people for a few years, and then after that period of time, then split everything, maybe among grandchildren, or if you don't have children of your own, maybe among nieces and nephews. And usually that's kind of where the trust stops.
Will you ever get a situation where the person who passes away wanted you to not tell, or didn't want to loop in the kids till they were deceased?
That happens a lot.
Okay.
That happens a lot, and that's kind of a generational thing. Older generations, baby boomers and older, don't like talking about money with their family, and they find estate planning to be of a very private nature. They don't want their children to know what's in their estate plan. They don't want their children to know what to do when they die. And it actually makes my job really, really hard.
Yeah.
But, you know, in both Kansas and Missouri, there is not necessarily a requirement for the person making that trust to tell the beneficiaries about certain aspects of the trust. Unless those beneficiaries are entitled to some kind of distribution currently, right? So a lot of people will not even know that their parents had a trust until their parents are dead.
Interesting.
And then somehow they find the trust. Maybe the parent's attorney calls one of the kids and says, "Hey, you're named as a successor trustee on this trust. We need to sit down and talk." And the kid's going, "What the hell?
Yeah.
What am I supposed to do?"
Yeah.
You know, and that really can be a challenge.
Have you ever seen a situation like a Mr. Deeds situation where, I don't know if you ever saw that Adam Sandler movie.
I'm familiar, yeah.
But far distant uncle gives their entire fortune to some other distant relative.
So I have not personally had that experience. However, in the estate planning lore, it's a very, very common thing. And that goes back to kind of a similar situation that we talked about earlier where, you know, what if somebody doesn't ever go see an estate planning attorney? And in those situations, when someone passes away, all of their stuff is subject to state statute. And state statute has these provisions that say, if you die without a will, here's where your stuff goes. Well, if you have no surviving spouse, if you have no kids, if you have no brothers and sisters, then things start going back up the family tree and out. So there are situations where a distant cousin that nobody ever knew existed can end up with several $1 million. And that is not terribly uncommon. And that's kind of like the Mr. D situation, except I think he was actually named in that will for some other reason.
Right.
But it's not uncommon.
Yeah.
It really isn't.
What does the current tax landscape look like for estates? Because I've heard that is constantly changing.
Constantly, just about every year. So currently, a married couple can pass roughly $22 million to anybody.
Without it being taxed?
Without it being taxed. The way the tax code reads is that each individual has about $11.2 million of exemption. So as an individual, I can have up to $11.2 million. I can distribute that however I want, and I will not be subject to estate tax. So the way the so then if you're a married couple, you simply double that.
Okay.
However, it's not exactly even, right? So let's say I die with $18 million in assets, and my wife has $5 million. Now that doesn't work. $2 million in assets.
Okay.
So collectively, you have $20 million in assets, right? So if I die first, and if I haven't done proper planning, then I'm going to owe an estate tax on everything I have over that 11.2 million. My wife then would have no estate tax because she's only got 2 million in assets. But again, with proper planning, by going to see an estate planning attorney, you can essentially shift that $7 million that I have over the estate tax exemption to my wife.
Interesting.
So that she ends up with 9 million and I end up with right at that exemption amount.
The vast majority of people don't know this.
The vast majority of people don't have $22 million.
There's that too.
But you're absolutely right. Most people don't know that.
Yeah.
And they really wouldn't know that unless they're digging into estate planning tutorials or meeting with estate planners or actively engaged in the financial world. So the tax landscape as it stands right now is you can be very, very, very wealthy and not face any tax consequences of dying or passing your wealth on.
Does that change per the administration?
Sometimes it changes within administrations.
Okay.
So for a long time, and the reason estate planning kind of became this vehicle for the uber wealthy is because up until about 15 years ago or so, the estate tax exemption was closer to $1 million. And for a long time, it was closer to $500,000 to $625,000. So going back to that, using that example, if I've got $18 million, anything that I have over $625,000 is subject to estate tax. Mm-hmm. So in that environment, there was a lot of estate tax planning, irrevocable trust planning, very complex tax planning to try to avoid as much of that tax consequence as possible. Where we stand currently at $11 million a person, like I said, you can be very, very wealthy and not be subject to any estate tax. So really what we're doing as estate planners for, the rest of us, is family planning, legacy planning, income tax planning, trying to use state income tax laws to benefit the beneficiaries. Can we change the home of the trust to a different state that has a lower income tax rate on trust, right? So, it's a lot different than it was 10, 15 years ago when it comes to estate planning. And there really isn't a whole lot of tax planning that's involved with estate planning anymore. A lot of it is really just ensuring that the family members that you want to be recipients of your estate are the recipients of your estate, and making sure that if you become incapacitated, if you're injured, can't work, if you become disabled, that there is a mechanism in place to take care of you and your family.
Wow. Where do you want your firm to be in 5 to 10 years?
Well, I called it the Casey Estate Planner for a reason. No, I kid a little bit. No, as it stands right now, I'm a one-man show, and I really love it that way. In 5 years, I would love to be well known as the estate planner for young families.
It's great, simple, direct.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to cover? Maybe about the business or what you do?
I mean, I'd probably talk to you for another hour and a half if I really wanted to, but no, I mean, I don't think I have anything to volunteer. If you've got any other questions for me, I'd be happy to answer them.
No, it's been excellent.
Okay, cool.
Super informative. If people want to get in touch with you, how should they go about doing that?
Sure. So the easiest way to find me is on my website, www.thekcep.com, thekcestateplanner.com.
Okay.
And you'll find all my contact information there. You can email me directly from the website. You can read a little bit about me and my background and kind of why estate planning kind of struck a chord with me. And yeah, reach out to me if you can.
Awesome.
Hey,
this has been great, man.
Hey, thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate it.
Yeah.
All right. That was great.
How'd we do?